Welcome to AP Biology. Our final video is going to talk about some other aspects of evolution. One of these aspects is coevolution. It's common to see traits that are adapted both in predators and in prey. And so you can see some turtles have very long legs, and some turtles have long front legs and longer necks and a nice high shell, a nice high arching shell. And that allows them to reach food that's higher off the ground. Well, the plants where these things existed also have their food higher off the ground. And so this was a arms race. So as the plants got higher and higher, the need to be able to reach higher and higher took place. And so we see this major adaptation in these turtles in the Galapagos Islands to a particular environmental situation. If you look at the turtles that live on the places where there's food is not hard to reach, they have short little necks and they have shells that come down nice and flat. And so they have not adapted to food that's higher off the ground. Speed of cheetahs and gazelles are directly related to one another. The faster cheetahs are the ones that survive, and the faster gazelles are the ones that survive. And so they've driven each other to faster and faster speeds over time. This flower, this orchid, and this fly have closely related mechanisms. This fly is the only one that can stick its proboscis all the way down to the base where the nectar is. But in doing so, the pollen sacs attach to its nose, the proboscis here, and then when he goes to the next flower, he's going to fertilize that next flower. Another example of evolution is something we call convergent evolution. And this is where different organisms will adapt similar characteristics because they live in the same environment. So the torpedo shape is a really good shape to be if you live in water. It lets you travel super fast through water. And so we see a torpedo shape in large sharks and dolphins and birds that live in the water, like penguins and seals. They all have this torpedo shape, which allows them to travel through the water very effectively, where they're fatter towards the end, but real aerodynamic and narrower towards the back. And it works really well moving through water. Parallel evolution is when two species arrive at the same result, but they went down very different paths. So the flying squirrel and the sugar glider have gone down totally different paths. One adapted to the environment in North America and one adapted to environments in Australia, but very similar environments. They fill a similar niche. One's a marsupial and one's a placental mammal, but they fill a similar niche in both of those environments. So they look almost identical, even though they have no related ancestry, or not anything recent anyway. Sexual selection is where we see males with particular characteristics or females with particular characteristics that are selected for by the other sex. So peacocks that have nice big tails with lots of eyes in them have super good genes, and so females want to mate with those peacocks. It's not very good as far as natural selection. It's long, it's heavy, it slows you down, it makes you easier to be eaten, but it also allows you to mate with the best females. And so it's got its price, but it's worth it for these males to be able to mate with the best females. You notice the female doesn't have any of those characteristics. She is more camouflage to the environment. We see the same thing in ringneck pheasants, females being more camouflaged, the males displaying characteristics that the females would be attracted to. This is a finch. Same thing here. The brighter the colorations, the more the female is attracted. This is a male spider trying to attract females. I guess a male human trying to attract females. Bottlenecking is another situation we see sometimes in evolution, and that's where a population will go through and become very small for a portion of time, and then it can regrow afterwards. But when that happens, you lose a lot of your genetic diversity. And so bottlenecks are very harmful to species when it comes to being able to survive for a long period of time. It's very difficult on cheetahs right now because there's so much inbreeding because of a bottleneck that they only have about a third of their offspring survive in the wild. So it's a real challenge on some species to go through a bottleneck and then try to recover. Genetic drift is when things change just due to chance. Sometimes that happens. This is a computer program where they wanted to see how quickly the population would drift one way or another. And if you set the population at 1,000,000, the orange line hardly drifts at all. But as the population gets smaller and smaller and smaller, you get more and more drift. So at 100,000, there's a little bit of drift, but it drifts back. The purple line drifts back and forth a little bit. But as soon as we get that population really small, like down to 100 individuals or 10 individuals, you can drift one set of alleles right out of existence. You can see that has happened with the light blue version or the darker blue version here. Hybrid vigor exists in certain populations. Sometimes when we hybridize certain plants together, you get even more successful plant. You can see that with tomatoes. This is the output from one species and another, and then this is what we get from the hybrid. We do this a lot with corn too. We hybridize corn all the time. If any of you have detasseled, that's what we're doing. When we detassel, we're hybridizing the corn. We're putting a male row and then a bunch of female rows and then another male row. But the male rows are a different species or a different version than the female rows. And so you are hybridizing those to get the best possible combination from that corn. Then the last thing we haven't talked about yet is punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism. Gradualism is an idea that things slowly change over time, and punctuated equilibrium says we have real fast change and then long periods of non-change. And probably what happens is you probably have punctuated equilibrium that's followed by gradual long changes over time. So neither one of these is probably totally correct. Probably you have fast change, and then the gradualism would probably take place in between those periods of fast change. Then the last idea we never talked about in the earlier films is adaptive radiation. So adaptive radiation is when a species like with the finches on Galapagos land on one island and adapt to that, but then some of the finches move to another island, and then they have to adapt to a different environmental situation. And as they move from island to island, they are going to adapt to different types of conditions. So they are radiating out from the original finch to lots of different variations of that finch. And sometimes they can even come back to the original island, okay, and survive side by side. But they really need some geographical isolation, or at least some ecological isolation, in order to become different enough from each other that they no longer want to breed with one another. And then the last thing, analogies. Sometimes this is not really an evolutionary thing, but we often see structures in nature that have a similar job, but they have a totally different evolutionary history. So like a dragonfly wing and a bird's wing, they both allow the organism to fly, but they are not genetically related. So we wouldn't see structural similarities in the dragonfly wing and the bird's wing, and we don't see genetic similarities between these two species as well.